Hey everyone, my name is Jeff Batt, and welcome to this course on JavaScript arrays and collections. Now, we're going to be covering different kinds of methods that you can use when you're working with arrays and different kind of collections like sets and maps. And also, we're going to be talking about typed arrays. So really, we're going to dive into these different types of data storage where we can go in and store some of the data that we're working with our different applications. So let me go through before we dive into this course, and let me talk about what is not covered and what is covered in this course. And so what is not covered is the array basics. You should be coming into this course basically understanding the basics of arrays and how to create an array and how to add things to the arrays, how, basic properties of the arrays, as well as push and pop, being able to add things and take things away from an array, as well as being able to access the basic arrays using dot notation or whatever you need to access the basic parts of an array as well. You should be familiar with that, as well as for loops. You should be familiar with for loops and how to iterate over an array using a for loop. Now, what is covered in this course is we'll be talking about advanced methods that you may have not actually come across yet, like list of, find, fill, and other types of methods like that. We'll talk about new ways to iterate through an array. We'll talk about for each. We'll also talk about for of and being able to iterate in those different methods, which actually make it a whole lot more simple to iterate through an array. We'll talk about these new data collections like sets and maps and what are they, and how you can store information inside of sets and access information from the sets, as well as access information from the map using keys and values. So really, we're going to dive into that in a certain section as well. Now, we're also going to be talking about specific methods for those sets and map, being able to access and being able to use the values or the keys and other types of methods like that. And then finally, we're going to wrap up this course talking about typed arrays. Typed arrays have very specific use cases, and they allow you to access binary data and get to that data if you're using APIs like Canvas or WebGL or anything like that. So we'll talk about what typed arrays are, how to create typed arrays, and how to access information from the typed arrays as well. So that's really what we're going to be covering in this course. It's really talking about data. So we're going to be using JavaScript to create these different types of sets and maps. We're going to be using these more advanced methods in arrays like list of and find and other things like that. If you're ready and this sounds like a good course for you, let's go ahead and dive in. But if you're not ready and you need to cover some of the basics of arrays, I highly recommend you go in and make sure that you check out the JavaScript Fundamentals course before coming here. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Before we dive in and start talking about using some of the advanced methods with arrays, let's go ahead and review the sample project that we're going to be working with. Now, this sample project is essentially a sales tracker. And so we have our carved rock fitness, and whenever we get a new cell, we're going to enter that cell into here. So we see our yearly revenue. We also see our last 3 months revenue as well. We see our different department cells and how they're doing on the different department cells. And then we see the recent cells as well. Most of the course will be working with this monthly cells, and we'll be adding the different cells in there. And we're going to be generating this chart and using the chart to really graph the cells that come in. We're going to have this modal here, and if I click on this modal, and I can enter in information about the cell, and that will generate the new data inside of this project. So to generate the charts, we're actually going to be reviewing a framework called Chart.js, and we're going to dive into that in the next video. It's not complex to use, but we'll make sure that we know how to use it, and then we're going to use that to actually display the data, and the data is going to come from our arrays. It's also going to come from our sets. It's also going to come from our maps. So we're going to work with the different data formats and show you how to actually go in and create the data inside of those different formats and then access the data and use it to generate these different graphs. Now, in the next video, you'll download a starter project and you'll download a finished project. The finished project is the project that we use throughout the entire course. And so if you want to go in and take a look at the code to see what was used throughout and you want to see the final vision, you can go ahead and take a look at that. And that will be the finished project for this section, and then we'll have a finished project for the next section and a finished project for the last section as well. Now, a lot of the layout has actually been built using Bootstrap. So we've attached some of the Bootstrap files so we can use the different layouts. That's how we get the responsiveness as well. That's also how we get some of the functionality like the modals, and we have different rows. We also have different columns that we can use in order to create these different types of layouts. And so you can see here, you can go through, it's marked up. You can see where the recent sales comes in. You can see where the new cell entry, which is a modal, and that pops up with a new cell that allows me to actually enter in that information and go from there. So we're not going to be working a lot with the HTML, and we're not going to be working a lot with the pages.js. But if you wanted to go in and customize the style, you're more than welcome to go in and do that. We are going to be working with this page.js. This is really where we're going to be putting in all of our code and working with the code, and building the chart.js and everything like that is going to be inside of this page.js. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into chart.js and make sure we know how to build these charts using chart.js. So now we're going to take a look into a framework that allows us to create charts easily called chart.js. Now, we're not going to dive into everything that you can do with chart.js, but we're at least going to use it to update and visually display our data. So let's go ahead and take a look at the chart.js code and what we can do with that. Now, download the project files, the module 2 project files, and start out with the 01 starter project. If you wanted to take a look at the finished project, you can go ahead and do that as well. But just to play it safe, I like to go ahead and copy and paste that onto my desktop and then close that out and start working with this. Let's go ahead and open this up in our code here. So I'm using Sublime Text. You can use Visual Studio Code, you can use Atom, whatever you wanted to. This is essentially what we're going to be working with. So I'm going to go ahead and actually open this up as a preview as well. So I'm double clicking on the folder, and I'm going to go ahead and double click on the index.html. And right now we don't have any data in there. We don't have any graph or anything like that. So what we want to do is we actually want to build the graphs, and I'm going to come down here into the index.html. And the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and create our monthly cells. This is going to be a bar chart. So let's go ahead and just type in canvas. And now we're going to say ID equals monthly cells. That is going to be our ID, and that's how we communicate to it in the JavaScript. And we need to have two more attributes, which is going to be the width, and it's also going to be the height. And the height is going to be 300, the width is going to be 400. All right, so let's go ahead and copy this, and this is going to be the same thing for our pie chart, but we need to change the ID to something else. I'm going to go ahead and just say DEPT cells, department cells. All right, so let's go ahead and open up our page.js, and we need to reference those two different objects using the ID. Now, this is a little bit different than normal. We need to add on some additional context when we reference this, and so let's go ahead and just say this is our charts. These are our charts here, and we're going to say let ctx equal document. Let me move this out of the way so you can see it better. So document.getElements by ID, and then we're going to say inside of there we're going to be looking for our monthly cells, which I can come into the index.html, copy where it says monthly cells, go ahead and paste it right there. And so let's just end that with a semicolon. I'm going to copy that and paste it down one line. We're also going to do this for our pie chart. So let's go ahead and say pie ctx here. And instead of monthly cells, we're going to go back into our index.html. We're going to grab the department cells, come back into page.js there, and then just paste that there as well. Now, that's how you would get it normally with an ID. However, we need to do something additional when it comes to chart.js. We actually need to say get context, and then within there, we need to actually get the 2D context. And so we're working with a 2D element, because with chart.js, you can do 3D, you can do 2D as well. So we need to make sure that we define it as the 2D. So we have those two things that we can communicate to. So from here, we essentially just need to actually go in and build out our chart. Now, for the sake of time, because we're not focused on chart.js in this course, I'm just going to go ahead and copy that. And then I'm going to come in here on line 5, and I'm going to paste that. And I'm going to make sure that this is my bar chart, and this is my monthly cells. And the monthly cells, let's actually do a monthly cells chart here. And that is going to create a new chart, and it's going to give it the type of bar. And then it's also going to have labels that says October, November, and December. And then our data, which is going to be 12, 19, and 3. Now this will associate the October with 12, November with 19, and December with 3 automatically. It'll also add on the background color This is how we define the color with RGBA. Also the border width, right now we're defining it as 0. And there's a couple different options that you can do with the bar chart. And right now we're just starting out at 0. That's where the bar chart itself is going to start out. So if I went ahead and saved that and came in here and previewed it, you could see that the bar chart is right there. And all I need to do to update that is actually come in here and change this to a different data point, and you can see it automatically adjust. Really, we're just creating and we're feeding an array into this bar chart in order to create that data. I'm going to come in here and actually copy the pie chart here, and you can see the difference between the pie chart and the bar chart. Let's come down here and just call this one pie, and then just paste that in right there. And you can see we're just creating a variable. And the reason why I'm using var instead of let is because that is the way that is defined in Chart.js and their documentation. So I'm just sticking with their documentation there, but everywhere else I'm using let here. All right, so here we're also passing in labels and we're passing in the data as well. If I save that and hit preview, you can see that I'm pulling up my pie chart here and I'm pulling up my bar chart. That's essentially what you need to do in order to work with Chart.js and to feed the data. We're going to be working with different arrays and methods in order to update the labels and update the data. So we'll be coming back to these data points often throughout the course. In the next video, let's talk about creating an array through a list of arguments. So let's talk about creating an array from a list of arguments. And so this is a method that we can use in order to actually create this array. So what we're going to do is come up here and we're going to just create an array here. So I'm going to say let and then say monthly sales. And this is going to be our monthly sales that contains all of the data for it. And then I'm going to create an array here by simply just saying array.of. This is a method that we're calling that will take the list of arguments and it will convert it into an array. So I'm going to give it 3 different arguments. I'm going to say 12, 9, and then I'm going to say 3 there. And that's essentially it. I've created this array just by simply calling a method and passing in some parameters. If you were to create an array just by saying array, for example, you still have to create it in a variable, but if you were to say array and then open close parentheses and then just say 5, that is actually not going to create an array with the 5 parameter with the data 5 in there. It's going to create an array with 5 different spots. That's what we're avoiding here is by using the of method, we're creating an array with 3 different spots, and the first value is going to be 12, the second value is going to be 9, and the third value is going to be 3. So that is how you go in and pass in the parameters instead of just creating how many spots there. Coming down here, all we need to do to update the monthly sales is copy that and come down to where it says data right here. And I can just basically get rid of that array of data right there and copy and paste that in there. And now if I was to go ahead and preview this, you can see that it's going to use my 12, 9, and 3 array in my monthly sales instead of using the array that was there. That way I can have it be more dynamic and I can bring in the data from a form or something like that and then have it update automatically from there. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing with the labels. So I'm going to say monthly labels and I'm going to say equals array.of. And now I'm going to pass in strings instead of numbers. And so the first one is going to be October. The second one is going to be November. And then the third one is going to be December. So we're passing in 3 different strings there. And now I'm going to take this monthly labels. I'm going to copy that, get rid of this array where it says labels right here. And I'm going to go ahead and paste that there. Now, if I was to go ahead and preview this, you can see that it has October, November, and December, which is what it was before, but now it's actually being pulled from this array instead. Let's do one more thing. I'm going to make sure that these are together, and I'm going to create 2 more arrays here. The first one is going to be department cells. So we're going to say department cells equals, and then array of, and then I'm going to say 12, 9, 3, and then I'm going to say let department labels equals array of, and then we'll pass in, we're going to have different types of categories. So we'll say hiking, we'll also say running, and then finally we'll say hunting. All right, now if I basically just copy that and come down here, and then let's update this variable to chart, just so we can talk to the chart here. And we're going to say the labels is, let's grab the labels right there, the department labels. I'm going to go ahead and update this right here. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab the cells, and then I'm going to update this right here. And that's it. So let's go ahead and hit refresh now. So you can see now our pie chart is updating, our bar chart is updating as well. And we've been able to create the arrays pretty quickly just by passing in the parameters. The next thing that we're going to be talking about is the spread operator with arrays. Now this comes in handy tremendously. Before I show you how to use it, let's go ahead and actually create a function that will add the yearly total. So I'm going to say function, and then we're going to say add yearly total. And then I'm going to allow 3 different parameters. And so I'm going to say A, B, C. I'm going to make this more useful as the course goes on here, but let's just go ahead and accept those. And then I'm going to return A plus B plus C. I'm going to take all these 3 parameters, I'm going to add them together, and that's what it's going to return. So let's see how this is working. So I'm going to go ahead and just create a variable here, and I'm going to say let yearly total equal, and then we're going to say add yearly total. We're going to call that function, and so I'm just going to go ahead and pass in those monthly sales there. If I was to go ahead and alert this, we'll have a problem here, and let's go ahead and see what that problem is. So I'm going to say yearly total, and let's go back in and preview this. Hit refresh, and you'll notice that it has 12, 9, 3, undefined, undefined. The problem is it's not separating out these as parameters. It's not taking, okay, the first one, and that's going to be the first parameter, then the second one, that's going to be the second parameter, and so forth. We actually have to define it as separate parameters, and so I would have to come in here and actually say, oh, let's pass in the first one, and then let's pass in the second one, and pass in the third one, and so forth. So there's an easier way to do that. That's where spread operators comes into play. All you have to do to use a spread operator is if you have this array, you just add a ... when you're passing that in. And now it will take each of these individual items and it will pass it in as separate parameters. And that's it. So if I go ahead and come back in and preview this, let's hit refresh, you'll notice that it has 24 now, which is the total of 12, 9, and 3. So it just automatically does that for me. It grabs them in and uses them as each individual parameters. Well, let's go ahead and actually update our total. Instead of alerting this, let's actually go in and grab our label. So I'm going to come up here where it says yearly revenue. I have this yearly total ID. So I'm going to come back into page.js, and I'm going to go ahead and call this yearly total label. Let's actually just say yearly label here, and just say equals document.getElement by ID, and we're going to go ahead and get that element, which is yearly total. That's the ID inside of the HTML. So after that has grabbed and it's done the addition, we're going to go ahead and say yearly label.inner HTML, and then we're going to say equals, and then we're going to concatenate a $sign on there, and then after that we'll go ahead and add on the yearly total. So it's going to update our label here as soon as we hit refresh. You'll notice there it is, it has 24, and it's automatically updated for me. So that's how I can go in and update that label and use the spread operator. So let's go ahead and actually update our monthly sales to be a lot more than just these small numbers. I'm going to go into the thousands here. So I'm going to say 12,000, 9,000, and then let's go ahead and say 3,000. Now if I come back in here, hit refresh, you'll notice that the total has gone up a lot more. Now I'm going to come in and do a couple other things, and I'm going to down here. So let's go ahead and add on to this a little bit more. So I'm going to go ahead and create 3 different variables, and I'm going to say October nums, and then I'm going to pass in an array of, and then let's go ahead and just update, random numbers here, 12,000, 1,000, and then let's do 9,000 there. And now I'm going to go ahead and copy that because I want to have 3 different ones. The first one is going to be October, the second one is going to be November, and then the third one is going to be December. And let's go ahead and update these to be random numbers, and I just want to have different numbers to work with here. So I'm going to go ahead and say that one is going to be 4,000. Let's make sure we have 4,000 there. All right. I want to just go in and calculate all of these different totals. These are all my different parameters that I'm passing in, but I want to take all of those parameters and calculate them into one total. So I'm going to say let total equal, and then we're going to say array of, and then we're going to pass in each of those numbers. Now I don't have to actually pass in each individual one. I could actually use the spread operator to pass in each of those. So I can say ... copy October, and then say ... again, go ahead and copy November, and then say ... again, and then copy in December. Now that's going to basically create all of those. And if I wanted to, let's go ahead and alert total. And now if I hit save and preview, you can see it does alert all those different numbers, but it doesn't actually add them together. So if I wanted to add them together, I would have to have each of them actually go through the add yearly total. So I can go ahead and just pass in each of those, and then just make sure I have it on each of those there. And they're going inside of the parentheses there, and there we go. So now if I come back in here and hit refresh, now I have 3 numbers. So now I have those 3 numbers, but let's go ahead and say add total, but let's actually come in here. Well, let's do a spread operator here, and then also add total to that spread operator. Do one more thing here, hit refresh, and now you can see I get my total. So I've been able to use the spread operator to get all of these numbers pretty quickly without having to type in each one or reference each location of each one as well. It's a pretty quick and easy way to be able to go in and to update that. Now, if I wanted to also come in here and add other ones, I don't have to stick with just the spread operator. I can add other ones and use the spread operator as one of the parameters there. So that's an introduction to the spread operator. Let's go ahead and move on to the next section. So we're going to use a method called array.find and findIndex to find a value. So let's go ahead and come in here. And what we want to do is we want to set up a button first of all. If I come back into my example, you can see that we have this add cell, but I want to have a button that says find 1,000. I want to find the first one that's over 1,000. Let me go ahead and make sure that the first one here, and we're going to loop through all of those. But let me come in here and on the monthly sales, let me make sure that the first one is under 1,000. And so we know that we're finding the one after that. I'm going to come back into the code here, and I'm going to go into the index.html, and I'm going to copy this add button, and I'm going to go ahead and paste that. Let's go ahead and change this add cell over to find over 1,000. So that's what that button is going to do, and it's going to find the first cell over 1,000. Now I'm going to go ahead and add on an onClick, and in the onClick we're going to call a function called find over 1,000, and then open and close parentheses, and we need to go ahead and create that function. So I'm going to come back into page.js. I don't want to use that alert anymore, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that alert, and then we're going to come down here and then just call that function and make sure that we come back into the index.html. I'm going to copy that function, come back into page.js, and then just paste that function there. And then open, close curly brackets, and there is our function. So now let's come in here and find the first value that's over 1,000. I'm going to store this inside of a variable, and I'm going to say first 1,000. And now I'm going to say equals, and what we're going to do is we're going to search the monthly cells. So I'm going to say monthly cells dot find, and we're going to look for an element. We're going to return an element that is greater than 1,000. That's really what it's going to go in. It's going to go through and find an element that is greater than 1,000. Now, element being a value essentially that it's going to do. Now I'm going to come in here and alert, and we're going to say alert first 1,000, and then end that with a semicolon. Now let's go ahead and preview this. You can see where it says add cell, and then we have the find over 1,000. Let's go ahead and click on that. You can see that the first value is 9,000. Even though the first value is not actually 9,000, it's 500, but we're looking for that specific one that's over 1,000. So if you're wanting to filter out, anything that's above 500 or so forth, you can do a method like this. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to come in here and find index. So instead of find, let's say we wanted to get the actual index number. So remember that in an array, the index starts out with 0 and then goes to 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So if you need to get the index for any reason, you can use, instead of find, you can actually add on index, and then it will give you that number back. So if I come in here and hit refresh again, and then click on find over 1,000, it's going to give me back the number 1. Keeping in mind that the first one is 0, the second one is 1. All right, so that is how you actually go in and use the find and find index to find a number or a location of an element. So let's say you wanted to take an array and then just put all the numbers back to 0, for example. Then you can use something like an array fill method, and we're going to actually cover that in this video. But before we do, we have a problem. If I come back into my example and I hit refresh here, if I click on find over 1,000, it does give me that alert. But if I click on close, it's going to pop open that modal. So I want to go ahead and just get rid of that modal. And the way that I do that is by coming back into the HTML. I'm going to get rid of where it says data toggle all the way down to where it says example modal. That will get rid of it. That's a bootstrap thing that will just make sure that that doesn't pop up. All right, so let's go ahead, and while we're here, we're going to copy this and we're going to go ahead and paste that. And we're going to change the label here to reset to 0. It's going to take the numbers and it's going to reset it back to 0. And let's go ahead and call the function of reset numbers, or just reset num there. And I'm going to go ahead and copy that function, come into page.js, and let's go ahead and create the function of reset number. Now it's going to go into the monthly sales and it's going to essentially fill all of them back to 0. So I'm going to say monthly sales.fill, and then I'm going to pass in the value that all of them are going to be set at. So I'm going to go ahead and say 0 there. And now what I want to do is I actually want to update the where we have monthly sales here. I want to update this chart. And the way that I can do that in chart.js is just by copying the name of that variable there and then just pasting it and then just clicking update, open close parentheses, and that will update the values and it will reset it all back to 0 there. So let's go ahead and hit refresh, and you can see that we have our numbers, but I have this reset to 0, and if I click on that, it takes all of them down to 0. So that's just a useful method to be able to say, okay, I want to start back from scratch, and then as you start to add more, then it will start to add more and start to fill out the chart and everything like that. So just a useful method that you may need to use to reset data or to set data across the board on an array. Now we're going to be talking about different methods to be able to iterate through an array. We're going to focus more on for each in this video, and in the next section we're going to be talking about for of. And these are new methods to be able to go through each of the different elements inside of the array and work with that array. So let's go ahead and come in here, and really we have some inefficient code. We have this A, B, C, and it's returning the value, but if we had additional parameters like this one right here, it's going to throw off that code. It's not going to work. And so what we want to do is we want to modify this code a little bit. And so I'm going to come in here and I'm going to just modify this to accept one parameter. And I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this return. And I'm going to get rid of this line right here, or at least comment out the line 20. And I'm going to get rid of this yearly total right there as well. I still want this yearly label that's going to go in and update the label, but we need to do some calculations with this before it actually gets updated. So we'll just leave that there. All right, so coming in here, let's create a variable first of all. So I'm going to say let yearly total, and by default it's going to be 0. All right, so now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say yearly total is equal to, every time this function gets called, it's equal to whatever the parameter is that's getting passed in plus the current amount of yearly total, whatever amount it may be at that time. And that's really all that I want to do inside of that function. Now what I want to do is I actually want to loop through this monthly sales array, and I actually want to pass in whatever the parameter is right here. I want to go ahead and pass that in. Now I can simply just go ahead and just type in or paste in the name of the array and then just do a for each loop across all of that. And that's how I do a for each, just for and then a capital E for each there. And now if I wanted to call a function for each of these different parameters, all I have to do is copy in that function name into the parentheses there. And what it will do is it will basically go through this function and it will take the yearly total, add on whatever the parameter is to the yearly total, and then it's going to go ahead and update our total there. And since we have this label right here, after all that calculation is done, it's going to go ahead and update the inner HTML to that yearly total. That's it. So now I can come in here and hit refresh, and you'll notice that it automatically updates for me. So I can see here that it has 12,500. If I came back into my code here and I went ahead and updated that amount to say, okay, let's pass in another parameter like 400 here, hit refresh, you can see that it automatically updates. So it's just a more dynamic way to be able to handle any amounts that this array may have. And so it'll just go through each of those arrays, and it will go ahead and add that to our total. In the next section, we're going to be talking about the for of loop and how to use the for of loop in sets, but it's going to work exactly the same way inside of arrays. So we'll focus on that in the next section. But let's go ahead and talk about what we've learned about in this section and wrap everything up before we move on to the next section. So we have covered a lot in this section, so let's just quickly review what we've learned here. We've talked about the course overview, and we talked about what we'll be learning in each of the different sections and what we won't be learning, and some of the different basics of arrays that you may need to go back and review from a different course. We also talked about chart.js and how to update chart.js. We talked about how to add in the different values of chart.js as well. We talked about array of, being able to create an array from a list of different values. We talked about using the spread operator as a quick way to be able to add all the different values of an array inside of a parameter or something like that. We also talked about array find as well as array find index if you wanted to find the specific index. We talked about using array fill to be able to fill out the content of the array. Like I mentioned before, that's mostly if you wanted to reset it to a certain number. And then finally, we talked about iterating through an array and using the for each to be able to go through and quickly take all the values and use all the values to do something more efficiently. So that's really what we've covered. We talked about more advanced features for the standard arrays, but now we're going to go in and dive into working with sets, which sets are data collections, and we can use sets for being able to handle data more efficiently and adding on some additional methods that we can do that's beyond our standard array methods that we have here. So really, we're going to dive into sets. You're going to become familiar with sets. In the next section, in the section after that, we'll be talking about maps and how they differ and some of the different methods you can use in maps, and then finally typed arrays. So we're just scratching the surface. Let's go ahead and jump on to the next section.